Hi there, welcome back to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each week I interview a photographer about 3 lenses that have meant something to them on their photographic journey. It's a bit of gear chat, but gear chat as a fun device or excuse to talk to someone I admire, or in this case, don't get to talk to enough. My guest today is Simon Baxter, a landscape photographer based in North Yorkshire. He's had a YouTube channel for many years, and we actually met in person at a workshop day that he did for me and my stepdad, which, it turns out, terrifyingly enough, was in May 2019. How time flies. We touch in the conversation on how Simon arrived at photography, what it means to him, and what he wants his viewer to feel, as well as, very importantly, how Meg, his dog, is doing. So, here's my conversation with Simon. How are you, sir? It's good to see you.
Yes, and you. How many years ago was the workshop?
Now, that is a question. The workshop where I brought my stepdad, who I think was the first person to come to one of your workshops who didn't actually know who you were.
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
"So watch these videos, Chris. We're going to go into the woods and take some photos." And he was like, "Yeah, I haven't done my homework." Yeah, how many years ago was that? I'm going to guess that would be maybe 2017 or 18, something like that.
Right. Okay, that would make sense. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
while now.
Yeah. I mean, the location that we went to was as I've not been in 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
It's just completely changed. That scene, I remember the scene that we photographed, and that's just destroyed now.
Oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
By like, as in people owned the land and did stuff to it, or is it just
Yeah. So there
disintegrated?
was there was a kind of like tree thinning process.
Right.
So some of the trees went.
Hmm.
The fallen tree was crushed, and they chopped off two of the main sort of feature branches on the sort of tree down in the distance as well.
Yeah.
So, and other photographers have found it since too, but
Hmm.
they kind of continue to photograph it. But yeah, I've not. It breaks my heart to see it, so I don't go back now.
No, no. I mean, you can never go home, can you? I think that's the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I still
Yeah.
talk about that. I talk about that trip or that day with you a lot because I talk about
Oh, cool.
when talking about like photography and patience. And there was a on that trip we went somewhere and it was out in the middle of nowhere and of course I didn't tag it. But there was a tree you were talking about. We were talking about patience and like waiting for the right thing to turn up. And you pointed us and it was across a river and you were on the other side of the river. There was a tree on a bank. It was a very steep bank opposite. And you were saying how you knew that on the right with the right light in the snow that scene would look amazing, but
Okay. Yeah.
that you were waiting for that time to kind of come up.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I always use that example of that consistency that's required and patience that's required in kind of good creative work. Like you can see it, but you've got to wait for that to kind of
Yes.
come along, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and kind of hand in hand with that, I guess, is the that connection with your local woodlands or whatever it is you like to photograph, because
Mm.
it's very difficult to be able to visualize that without having witnessed a location in that season previously, or knowing the trees, knowing how they behave through the seasons, and building up that kind of engagement with the place. That I think that helps with the visualizing. Yeah.
It's a patience game, isn't it? It's like composition and timing, but the timing element they don't tell you when you start. They're like it could be years, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
fine. I mean, what it's kind of the stubbornness in there as well, I think.
Mm.
It's having that idea in your mind's eye, and then you just want to prove to yourself that the vision was right, and
Yeah.
and make it happen. Yeah.
I like that. I think that is a nice, actually, stubbornness is a good way of putting it in a nice way. Like a lot of photographers, when I talk to them, there's a point during the conversation where, they're like, no, I'm gonna show you this
Yeah.
and it's gonna work. And there's a kind of
Yes.
like that confidence in your own creative vision. Kevin Mullins, who I interviewed a few months back for this, um, he started being a photographer. He just decided one day on a train
Okay.
he was like, I'm going to do this. And
Right.
it was like that Michael McIntyre bit where he talks about being a comedian. Like his partner was like, are you sure? You're definitely going to, you've never held a camera in your life. And he was
Yeah.
like, no,
Yeah.
watch me. And then 15-year career, Fuji ambassador, wedding photographer, like just did the whole
Right.
thing,
Right.
like
Brilliant. Yeah.
showed he could do
Commitment.
it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And is
So
life in Scotland good?
Life in Scotland's really good. The move has been really tremendous. I joked with Alice that when we moved, I would potentially wear out my camera from overuse because just we live. The house we live in is basically in some woodland. So what they did 30 years ago, they cleared the space for the house and then didn't really bother doing anything else. So it's all just heather and wild trees and just around the house, like literally feet. So in every direction around me, I can just see trees,
Right.
which is amazing. And then at
Brilliant.
sunset more than sunrise, although it happens on both because the sun goes over the top of the house. Sunset here is just incredible. Like it,
Right.
most nights the light streams through the trees in a way that you can make a, at least in the moment, pleasing image out of it. I've had
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
some misty mornings where there was one that I got. I'll send you after this. I mean, it's not, these are not Simon Baxter level photos, but they're pleasing to look at woodland scenes of like, oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a real treat to kind of have that right outside and just
I
on your
bet. Yeah.
doorstep and just to around you all the time. And we've got there's lots of wildlife comes through, deer comes through lots of the time, and there's a woodpecker that's local. There are two massive pigeons that are hilarious little characters that like come in the garden all the time, and
Yeah.
they're just, one of them's so fat he has a fat neck. Like I think we've fed them, we've made their life too easy, right?
Right.
They've got heather filled with bugs and ticks and things to eat, and then
Yeah.
we've kind of like thrown sunflower seeds at them for the and things like
Right.
that. So
Okay. Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
the local woodland, like the wildlife and stuff, is really really great. We did have an issue with my youngest and a tree house and a broken arm. Like when you buy a
Hmm.
house in the country with a tree house and you're like, hooray, you're playing the tree house. And then
Yeah.
it was one Sunday afternoon, we decided in our infinite wisdom, like, no, we're not going to let you play video games just yet. Go outside for half an hour and run around, and then you can play some games. And that turned out to be a bad call because the
Right.
youngest descended from the treehouse in an uncontrolled fashion, and he
Oh.
broke his upper arm above the
Oh.
elbow, which is
Right.
that's quite hard going. I think he must
Yeah.
have fallen and shoved his arm out into the ladder to kind of stop himself, and then it didn't.
Right.
Um, yeah, he turbo broke it. Like he came in, and I felt the top of his arm. Alice went, "Do you think it's broken?" It just felt like a beanbag. It's like, yeah,
Oh no.
it's really
Oh,
bad.
that's gross.
So yeah, no, it's horrible. But yeah, so life up here is amazing. The school is next door. The kids really love being here. Apart from the fact that it's rained constantly for a fortnight, but May was beautiful. May was
Right. Okay.
absolutely stunning. June has been a soggy mess.
I think it's been the same
But
everywhere, to be honest. But
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But May was great, and that's pretty common for Scotland. You come up here a lot though, don't you? You do workshops and
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. It is May. I've been in May before. I can't remember the last time I was in Scotland in May, but
Hmm.
I do always remember it being very nice at that time of year. We
Yeah.
went, in fact, we went to Scotland in May 2012, which is when Adele and I got engaged, and it was her
Yeah.
30th birthday. And that was just crazy weather. I mean, it got up
Mm.
into the high 20s,
Yeah.
and it was just clear blue sky all the time. It was horrendous for photography, but I wasn't
Yeah.
that bothered then. We were just, but for the holiday, it was fantastic. Yeah.
On a good day, you can't beat Scotland. It's
Mm.
just an amazing place to be.
Yeah.
So do you still do the workshops and stuff? Are you planning on being up again anytime soon?
Yeah, I'll be up in October
Mhm.
for a week. But I've not been doing as many workshops.
Okay.
I've kind of cut back a little bit. Having my book allowed
Mm.
me to do that.
Yeah.
So I've done a good few one-to-ones this year, but I don't do as many one-to-ones as I used to.
Yeah.
I don't think things have quite fully recovered since COVID.
Yeah.
That was I took a big hit then,
Yeah. I
because
bet.
at that time I didn't have the book, and workshops were my main income.
Yeah.
So but because the book came in end of 2021, that made a big difference and just sort of changed my thinking moving forward, really. So I mean, I do like doing the workshops. The only downside of doing the workshops is it's obviously less time to actually go out and work on your own projects. So moving forward, I would like to have more and more time to myself just to kind of work on passion projects.
Yeah. How did the book come about? Did you self-publish and do all the bits, or did you
Yeah,
have someone help
everything. Yeah,
edit? And yeah, wow.
everything. Yeah, yeah. So I got a friend who's a graphic designer, and all he did was just send me a template for InDesign, not a book template, literally just
Mm,
blank pages, so that I had the sizes correct.
right.
And he just explained, this is your bleed area and things like that.
Yeah.
And I just went ahead and did it, and then he just tidied up some of the text at the end, and that was it.
Really nice.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, brilliant, but extremely stressful.
So it's interesting. That's what I was going to ask about, because everyone I talk to who's done a book either acknowledges that like this is a pain that they're going to put themselves through again because it's the thing that they want to do,
Yeah.
or sometimes they go, I'm kind of never going to do that again. Like it was a
Okay.
lot. But I think a lot of the time there's the old joke for engineers that like we didn't do this because it's easy. We did
Yeah.
this because we thought it would be easy. And then
Right.
you start going
Okay.
through the process. I
Yeah.
think a
Yeah.
book is a bit like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd 100% do it again,
Hmm,
but I would do it again because now I've got the experience of
right.
doing the first one. So you learn from mistakes, and obviously I was a bit wet behind the ears as far as the whole kind of technical process of printing works. I'm used to
Hmm,
printing at home where I've got full control and I've got
yeah.
12 ink cartridges. You know, translating that to CMYK and then handing control to somebody else, that was the difficult bit.
Right.
And having this expectation that the print is going to look the same as what it looks on my screen. And when it doesn't, that drove me insane.
Right.
Because, it's like most photographers, they're perfectionists.
Hmm.
And when things aren't quite right, the only person that really cares is the photographer. Nobody else does, but
Yeah.
you agonize over the small details, and to the point where you start to feel ill.
Yeah.
That's the bit that I don't want to repeat.
Right. Got it.
But I'd like to think that next time I can do it in a way where there's not the pressure, there's not
Hmm.
the time constraint to get it out within a certain time frame because I need
Hmm.
the money. I'd like to
Yeah.
just release it as and when I feel the book is ready, and
Right.
be a bit more relaxed about it.
And will that start with a body of work, like a project or something that may be a long term thing that informs? Maybe at some point it will reveal itself to you of like, oh, this could be a book.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the gathering time was really just like, oh well, I've been taking photographs locally for several years. I've got a huge amount of work there to choose from,
Hmm.
which I guess inadvertently that was a project. It didn't start
Yeah.
out as a project. It's just like I like photographing trees that are local.
Hmm.
I didn't start off thinking, oh well, that could be a nice body of work that could be printed at some point. I guess the cohesion came from
Hmm.
the fact that it was all local, which, and because of my general approach to photography, the aesthetic was consistent. So it just made sense to kind of put it together as more with a more of a kind of autobiographical approach as well.
Hmm.
Whereas next time it's not going to be autobiographical because that's not going to be as relevant. And there would have been the idea before it started as to how is this going to look as a book. So
Yeah.
I don't know whether that will turn into you'd think that would turn into a better book. I don't know whether that would be the case. There was something really quite nice about gathering time in that, it was just very kind of organic in the way that the work evolved.
Hmm.
And it just came together in a sort of quite casual way, I guess. So yeah, it's like anything else, there's always something particularly magical about the first thing that you
Hmm.
produce of something. Um, so you won't repeat that, but I'd like to think that the next one has something different to offer. We shall
Yeah.
see.
Well, offer you as well as a person making things, because you don't want to just do the same thing. You don't have exactly the same experience every time as well, I guess. There's
Yeah,
things you
exactly.
learn.
You want to sort of see. I hate forcing change. I
Hmm.
absolutely don't want to do that. I don't want to do something different for the sake of doing something different.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I'll just probably become bored with the project.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very, very similar in that it'll be trees photographed in a very similar way to what I've always photographed trees, but the general motivation and narrative behind it will change, I think. But also the changes in the photography will be so nuanced. I personally I want to see a maturity there,
Mm.
but that maturity would be very difficult to pinpoint, I think,
Yeah.
unless you've got a very sort of trained eye to pick
Yeah.
up in those small differences. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I went out yesterday and I was looking at a scene that I photographed 8 years ago, and it was the first time I'd been back to that scene in 8 years. I thought I'm going to take another photograph of this, and it wasn't good conditions yesterday, but I thought I'd have a go anyway to see if I could do something better compositionally, and I couldn't.
Right.
Even with 8 years experience, and I was like,
Mm.
well, what does that tell me? Because when I made the image 8 years ago, it was entirely instinctive. The thought processes weren't as deep, as considered as what they tend to be these days. But sometimes that just doesn't matter. Sometimes
Mm.
something that's purely instinctive is what works the best,
Yeah.
and kind of gives a kind of soul to the image, which can be lost if it becomes too mechanical.
Yeah, I find that quite a lot with I'll take if I'm taking a photo of like a group of people or some friends or it's something that I want to remember, and I'll
Mm.
try and try and work the scene a bit, and then so often you come back to like that one moment and say you've got 10 frames, and then you look at the first one. And the first one was where you got it. The
Yeah.
other ones were just you making yourself feel better,
Yeah.
or you just exploring things and maybe overthinking it. Because I think
Yeah.
sometimes that can factor into it as well. Like if you put too much pressure on yourself, I've got to suddenly catch this moment. Like I don't know how people who, like your Annie Leibowitzes and people like that who like stay set up, right, I've got Dustin Hoffman for half an hour and this thing on top of a building in New York needs to be perfect for the cover of Vanity Fair. Like, I don't know how you do that. Like
Yeah.
presumably there just comes a point where you're just confident enough, like bang, got it. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
exactly what I need, but you've got
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
those moving parts. Whereas
Yes.
most of us don't have to worry about that at all. Like,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
the extra mile and use a tripod for Fen. Like something like, oh my goodness, it's a camera on a tripod
Yeah.
set
Yeah.
to maybe take a photo once you press the shutter, after 2 seconds with a pause. So you don't, that kind of thing. It's like, even that is more than a lot of people put themselves through in terms of
Yeah.
setup and
Yeah.
preparation.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, as far as the trees are concerned, it just shows how important that genuine connection and engagement is, because it means that every photograph is driven by that love for the subject matter. And that's what's informing the photography. That's, it's rather than, and I've never tried to kind of shoehorn rules and compositional concepts into a photograph. It's just like, I love what's in front of me. Now let that dictate to me where I should be positioning myself to show off everything that this scene has to offer, and needs to be celebrated in a way.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's what was kind of driving most compositions, really. I guess through time, the going through that more kind of considered contemplative approach, and I think helps to nurture that instinct further. And you noticed very, very small details, which to my mind adds to the image, but they're very easily missed by most viewers that look at it. Certainly missed if you post it on Instagram. So that's what I think where the kind of evolving and the growth happens, is just in the very small details, and also in kind of hit rate as well. Some things there's a little bit of luck there, and something that's purely instinctive has just worked out, but sometimes you do need that extra bit of attention to detail to make sure that you're making the good images every single time that you go out,
Yeah.
hopefully.
I think I increasingly think as well as I get more free highlights that like a lot of the preparation has happened beforehand. It's the thinking about other things. It's the looking at other people's work. It's the reflecting on your own work. It's
Hmm.
you've done that processing beforehand to then get to the scene, to then know
Yeah.
how to kind of, that's how you end up knowing what to do, and that's how I think creative people sometimes feel like a bit of a fraud because they can't quite tell you why it works or why that was how they approached it, but it was instinct and experience. but and they'd already done. It's almost like that. It's like cloud compute or something like that. You've done the processing elsewhere, and then when you arrive in the scene where you're just ready, and you
Yeah.
sometimes don't really know how, but
Yes.
like you've said there, like 8 years later, you approach that scene in almost exactly the same way, and the result would be almost the same, and maybe you
Yeah.
might get something a bit cleaner, or maybe or the light, whatever. But like fundamentally,
Yeah.
your instinct was correct 8 years ago,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Which, yeah, I mean, I don't quite understand it myself, because 8 years ago, I didn't have experience behind me either.
yeah,
So I'm not entirely sure why, because I mean, I look back to like 2016, and I still have some of my favorite ever images from that year.
mm,
And that's not because of experience. Absolutely not. And the only thing I can think of is that I think that's really where was the main year. I mean, I discovered woodland photography in 2015, but 2016 was when that real passion was ignited, and where I discovered all these hidden gems and beautiful places locally, which I had no idea were there.
mm,
And I think it really encouraged that childlike sense of imagination and wonder, and that desire and drive to go exploring
mm,
and be that. Because at that time I was still suffering. I was spent a lot of time unhappy, and I was in pain with my back, etc. But this was the one thing, after spending so much money on physiotherapy and things. So that was the added thing. So I felt like a kid again, but
mm,
also I felt as if there was something quite magical and profound happening that
yeah,
was helping me, physically, mentally. So those two things combined meant that actually the photography wasn't the primary reason why I was there. I was there because of the experience and what that experience was doing for me on a very deep level.
mm,
The camera was just a tool to celebrate that. So I didn't go out with any preconceived ideas based on things that I'd consumed or read about with regards to photography or any other kind of art medium.
mm,
It was just purely, I need to be in this space, I need to be in this environment and be nourished by everything that it has to offer. And the photography was just an extension of that. And I think that's fundamentally how I was able to see and make images, which I'm still proud of now,
mm,
8 years later, is just because I looked at everything with this kind of sense of awe, no
yeah,
no prejudice, like, just being that kid of like, everything's new, everything's fascinating. And that was it. That's what I wanted to experience, and I still want to experience now. And I still get that same feeling when I step into a new woodland for the first time, and then see a really interesting tree I've never seen before. And that's what it's all about. And then a lot of the time, you sometimes forget that you're there to make photographs. And that's usually how, if ever work is getting on top of me, or I'm feeling the pressure of social media, or something that's happened on social media is getting me down, I go into the woods without my camera,
right,
and just remind myself, this is why I do it.
yeah,
And next time I might bring my camera along.
yeah. I think that's quite good though, that because you can become a bit obsessed with like having the right thing. And just this is a terrible point to in the conversation to segue onto some gear, because I was going to talk to you about your first lens choice. But that's kind of the joke of the podcast in a way, is that
Yes.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
it actually doesn't matter. Your very early videos, I remember that joyfulness and that kind of celebratory feel really came through as you also started making videos and kind of sharing your
Hmm.
experience and your approach with the internet, and all the up and downs that come with that, of like putting yourself out there as well and getting feedback from an audience
Yes.
and
Yeah.
starting to be visible, because it felt like that period was also when photography more broadly was enjoying like a real come up in terms of like
Yeah.
popularity again, and suddenly people were talking
Hmm.
about stuff, and so suddenly you open yourself up to people with feelings about whether or not you should shoot that with a Zeiss, or whether you should shoot
Yes.
that with a Sony
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
lens, or like, can't believe you're not using the 55 1.8 fe, otherwise what are you even doing, how do you even whatever.
Yeah.
Another guy I talked to, John, on this podcast, was getting crap from people the other week for using a 35 millimeter lens to take portraits. And they were like, "You can't be a real photographer." And he's like, "No, I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm a real photographer, I promise." But like,
Yeah.
just used a 35 for this image. Like, I don't know
That's
what to tell you.
crazy.
It's
Right.
bizarre, isn't it? But your first choice then
Yep.
was it, well, was it a 1.8?
55 mil Sony
55
Zeiss.
1.8. Oh, it's the Zeiss 55. Yeah, love that lens. I knew that was what was on my mind. Chris and my stepdad, who came on that trip with us as well, he loves that one too.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a real
Yeah.
favorite of his, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, it's small and 55. I've never understood why it's not 50. Why it's 55 and not 50. I don't know whether Sony ever said.
I don't. When I think back to when I bought that lens, the kind of the idea of a nifty 50, that's a term that I hadn't even heard of.
Oh, right.
I can't even remember why I bought the 55. I must have read something at some point
Yeah.
saying that working with primes is good for your photography. I must have,
Yeah.
but I just don't have any memory of it. But when I bought into the Sony system, the first lens that I bought, because another photographer that had more experience than me said, "Oh, well, you need to get the 16 to 35." I was like, "Okay, then I'll buy the 16 to 35." So that was the first lens that I got with the Sony camera. And the reason why I haven't mentioned that lens to you is because, well, I didn't like it. It didn't do nothing from the photography because I hardly used it.
Right.
And the very next lens that I bought was the 55mm prime. And again, because I bought that 9 years ago. And because at that time I was still very conscious of the weight that I was carrying, and I hated the feeling of a backpack putting pressure on my lower back. So the 55mm, it was so small, so light. So I put that on the camera body, put the camera, had the shoulder strap, that off my shoulder, tripod in hand, and that's pretty much all I did for months. And I loved it. I loved that. I mean, I'm not afraid of a challenge. In fact, I kind of revel in it, really. So going into a local woodland, lacking experience in woodland photography, and then constraining myself to that fixed focal length of 55mm, it did wonders for my photography, because there was no frustration there. And there was no frustration because I was there, like I said, almost like forest bathing, if you like. So it didn't really matter what gear I had, and it didn't matter if I didn't make an image, because what I wanted out of being there was still happening whether I made an image or not. So there was no frustration. So if I was looking at a scene and I thought, "Oh, I really like that," but I couldn't make it work with a 55mm, oh well, there'll be another time. That's the other benefit of working locally. And but what it taught me as a photographer, and the importance of really working a scene, but also as you're stepping backwards, and each step back or each step forward to make a scene work with that fixed focal length. And in that process, those steps are tiny, they're very slow, and you're taking almost like a 180-degree view with each movement. You started to observe how these tiny movements made a huge difference in the scene, both in terms of relationship between trees, the interaction between single branches. So being able to kind of observe that and compose with your feet taught me to really work hard for compositions. And because I stuck with that, and that desire to travel light continued, it meant that when I did invest into the next lens that I mentioned to you, probably 6 months later, I still had that prime mentality. I never have any idea what focal length I'm shooting at. The zoom lens, I don't see it as a convenience. I see it because I've already positioned myself in the right place when the camera comes out the bag. You've already got an idea what the focal length is going to be roughly. And I've just kind of fallen into that. Well, that's how I see the world, is that, 55mm, you're pretty close to, your own kind of natural view of things. I think we're the equivalent of 45mm, something like that. So you're pretty close at 55mm, and that's just stuck. And I think that's because it's the images are a representation of the observed experience as well. So I've never done false perspectives. I've never got down low. I've never shot super wide. Those make great images, but I want to make images that I said, that is what I saw. That was my experience. I want to put that on the wall. And if people see that, I want them to feel as if they can step into it. And if they were there in real life, that's exactly what they would see. I love that.
No, it's nice. I mean, I think the 55 is great for that, for all those reasons. I apologize to listeners of the podcast for repeating myself, but I'm the consistent thing, so that happens a lot. But yeah, small and light always wins for me as well. Like, you could give me the best 50 ever, but I have a 50 f2 because it's smaller than the 1.4 and lighter, like much lighter. For example, like once you start to get down into like the crazy versatility of like 1.4s and 1.2s and things like that, it's like, well, for the twice a year that I'd probably use that and take advantage of that, I'd take a smaller, lighter lens every
Absolutely,
time.
yeah,
By and large, I am tempted by, because I'm on a Leica now, I'm on an M, and I do love the idea of like a 1.4 Summilux for its buttery smoothness. But I have to be realistic. Like, how much would I actually? Most of my time, as someone who's been like shooting at like F8, F5.6 a lot recently, and like trying to get a scene, it's like a more documentary sort of textured, detailed kind of image I'm looking for now. That's like a bit more. It's a bit less like focus on the kind of a leaf or a branch. It's like a bit like you're saying. Here's a scene. Here's the things in the scene that you can see, or when you're capturing street stuff or family stuff, you know, it's more in that documentary style. I'm not isolated. Like, it's to some extent, if I'm taking pictures of family, whatever, it's like, I know what my son looks like. I want to get this moment, this scene, this thing that's happening. The story within it is kind of a bit more interesting. And if you could show a bit more, and you're shooting, I quite often shoot at 35 anyway, so like you're getting quite a lot of context in there as well, you know. So like, there comes a point where stopping that down to f2 even is sometimes where you're losing the scene. I can't really see where they are anymore. So it's like, is it in service of what you're trying to do? But that makes me wonder, actually, you used to talk a lot about your storytelling and scene setting. You would almost see families and stories and narratives within the kind of the plants and the trees to come together. Does that still play into your compositions, and do you sort of see it? Because for me that sounded a bit like, you know, Renaissance painters or something like that, sort of telling a story within it. It always spoke to me like that.
Yes, I actually, thinking about it just off the top of my head now, probably a little bit less than what it used to. And I think the reason for that is because in the past, like I guess most people who start out in woodland photography, you're looking for that standout tree, you know, that particular character that, you know, breaks up the norm, that stands out from all the others. And it's like, it becomes an obvious subject, you know, something to point the camera at. And when you've got particular characters or a very limited number of characters, then you do start to see, you know, things like mythical beasts, or, you know, some sort of interesting interaction between 1, 2, or 3 trees. And I still love that. I'm still very much inspired by that. But I would say probably a lot of my images are starting to become more complex, where it isn't just about a particular character. It's more about, if I do have a character, well, I want to show more the wider context and give just as much attention and detail to all the things that are happening in the understory, all the trees that surround it. So we're building up a bigger picture of what the woodland is about, and how it's almost like a sense of how it's came to be what it is now. And those sorts of images, where they do get more complex, kind of do get lost on social media. And it's only when they're printed that's when they come to life. But that the whole thing of characters, you know, mythical beasts, you know, inspired by things of from Lord of the Rings and Avatar, and, you know, other forms of mythology. I still love that, because that still comes from that sense of being a kid again, that you have sort of stepped, you know, across a threshold into some sort of enchanted world. And you can't help but feel that, because some places where you go to, it's the difference between being in the woods and out the woods, it is two very, very different worlds. And when you're there on a calm morning and everything's damp and the colors are lush and the birds are singing and the lights breaking through and water's dripping off the trees, and you got these boulders just cushioned with these beautiful green and gold masses of moss and lichens and wood sorrel and wildflowers. It's just amazing. It really is. But, you know, finding those, it's that thing of wildness. It's that thing of places seemingly untouched by humans or have been left untouched for, you know, decades or hundreds of years. There's something extremely special about that. And it's why I'm always striving to try and find the places which aren't being photographed. And it's not about wanting to keep those places for myself photographically. It's about wanting, you know, enjoying the privilege of being in that space on your own and completely detached. And because you lose that sense of being in an enchanted world if there's other photographers wandering around. So if I want to escape into like a different dimension, if you like, then yes, of course, I need to be there on my own, or, you know, with Meg.
Yeah. No, that's really lovely. I can completely relate to that. That's why we moved. I think time outdoors is such a treat. You know, it's such a privilege
Yeah.
to be out in a place and to know, like, right, we might be the only people for miles around, and actually
Yeah.
just to have that stillness and to be there, you know, to really be able to take it in. And it's funny you mentioned as well, like the when it's maybe just after it's rained or whatever, because you shoot in all weathers. Like when I was making notes, some people I talk to are quite seasonal in their work, so like they
Yeah.
follow a sport or they do a thing or, you know, whatever, and then they've got an off season and an on season. But you're just out in all weathers, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's again, it's interesting when you, I wasn't conscious of this until a few years ago, the parallels between my general approach to hobbies. And when I used to be a mountain biker, I loved harsh weather. You know, it started to snow, there'd be a blizzard across the moortop. So I would go out on my bike. You know, I'd ride at night when the frost was forming on my jacket. And it was just again about that being at one with nature, you know, kind of, you know, if it's the snow biting at your skin, or if you're getting to the point where you can't feel your fingers when you're trying to operate the camera, or you're getting soaking wet through, it's just, then you're feeling nature, you're feeling what it has to offer, and what, you know, and it can throw as much at me as it wants, you know, obviously within safety boundaries. But to experience that and then hopefully capture that in a photograph as well, I think all those different kind of shades and colors of nature should be celebrated. But also, as a photographer of the woodland, I want to be able to understand that as an environment and get a feel for its different rhythms. And you can't do that unless you're prepared to go out there and experience it in all the different conditions. Because if you put yourself out there when the sensible person would probably stay at home with a nice cup of coffee, then it teaches you so much about what's possible in terms of mood, what good light actually is, because good light varies in so many different ways depending upon what you photograph. So you're basically just tuning into that and opening up new opportunities which you wouldn't have otherwise considered.
Yeah, you must test your gear in a way that most people don't as well. Like, the weather sealing and, you know, everything, like having the right
Well,
waterproofing and stuff like that.
yeah, I guess that, to be fair, I do get myself quite cozy under a nice umbrella. um, but it's you almost. I love that feeling of being in amongst it, but also protected. So you're
Yeah,
there and you feel it and you experience it, but you know that you've got the gear to keep you warm, keep you dry. But you're still feeling whatever it wants to throw at you, and I do like that. So I'm almost like a little cocoon underneath my umbrella, and I have my kind of geared head on my tripod, and I can make adjustments to the composition, and I'm really quite happy. And it's
Yes.
only when I can't feel anything that I go. That
Yeah.
I know
But
it's time to pack up and go home.
that's probably the time, isn't it, when you
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
feel your
yeah,
fingers. It's the same when I'm out on the motorbike. Like, okay, the season's ended. Like, even when I've got the heated grips on, if I can't feel my fingers anymore, then it's time to put the bike in the
yes,
garage for the winter and come back
yeah,
to it, in a bit.
yeah.
Because it's funny what you were saying about good knowing what good light is as well. Because I think if
Hmm.
you put yourself out there more often, good work comes from iteration cycles, right? You have to have tried something, looked at the
Hmm.
results, gone away and come back. There's that whole cycle of kind of reviewing what happened and then tweaking for next time. So I guess that the great thing for that is because you've been out in all weathers, because you've done this for years now, over a decade at this point, you've probably been
Mm.
taking photos and gradually got more and more professional and more engaged in it. You've seen far more, you've exposed yourself to far more conditions, which must
Hmm.
mean that you can make something, whether or not you're putting the pressure on yourself that day to produce, in
Mm.
inverted commas. I guess at this point that you can make something more readily maybe than some can because you didn't stay at home with a cup of cocoa when it was cold and wet. You can you can catch that
Yes.
moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because uh, when I mentioned earlier about that image that I made 8 years ago and I revisited it yesterday and I couldn't really do anything better compositionally.
Mm,
The difference is actually now I can go out in most conditions and make an image that I'm happy with.
mm,
Whereas 8 years ago, I was probably a little bit more reliant upon the typical conditions that people think are conducive for good woodland photography.
yeah.
Now I'm able to kind of deal with a more subtle light, and find other ways and means of getting separation and depth and
Mm,
layers, in a photograph. Um, but this is a really tricky thing for people who are in this game now, who have built up an audience because of things like YouTube and social media, is that there becomes an expectation from the audience from the type of image that you're going to publish.
right.
And also because the platforms that you're using, they're not ideal for those quieter images. So I could put an image out there that I really like, but it would probably just bomb
Mm,
on social
right.
media. It's not going to get a lot of engagement, it's not going to get many likes and things like that. So I guess with experience, what it's taught me is like that does not matter. You have to have kind of confidence and conviction in what you're doing to know that there's value in the images that you're making that
Yeah.
the masses aren't really appreciating. Um and, and so I do very much enjoy making those images, and it's more a sense of, is this a good photograph? It might be lacking a little bit of mood and atmosphere that mist or fog or heavy rain might provide, but compositionally, lighting,
Hmm.
and other different things, texture, detail, is it a well executed photograph? Have I achieved something here? And that's what I'm looking for, because they will have value somewhere, whether it's in a book, whether it's in an exhibition, something like that.
Mm.
Those sort of images, that's when it's time for them to sing. They don't sing, you know, they don't sing on a mobile phone, should I say?
No, I mean few images do, I guess, on when it's small. Not many people you talk to who make things go. And it's the same with filmmakers or TV people. It's like I hope someone watches this on the worst headphones imaginable on the smallest screen possible. Like there's very few people sort of say stuff like that. I also think it's something I've been thinking about recently, and I'm talking to someone, a guy called Doug Menwes, in a couple of weeks' time, who he was a photographer sort of through the 80s and I mean he's still working photographer now, but it was different sort of for the majority of the history of photography, you would see someone's work either at an exhibition or in a book or something like that. And so there would be this time period in between. And I think some of the challenge with social media, Sean talks about this, doesn't he? Sean Tucker talks about this a lot
Hmm.
in terms of like he uses Instagram, but it's a notebook and it's more
Yes.
for him than for anyone else. Right. And
Yeah.
like if someone else is looking at it, great, whatever, but don't infer too much from it because I'm trying stuff
Yes.
out and I'm working stuff out
But
just to
people will
become
anyway.
sure they will. But I think that's the thing. It's why with the podcast, I've chosen not to look at the stats since the first week. Like I'm just not
All right,
looking
good. Good. Yeah.
because what value? Last week I lost one person from my email subscriber list, and in a moment in that moment, I was kind of devastated. I was like, why would
Yeah,
they
yeah, yeah,
go?
yeah, yeah.
Because I've only been doing it. I've been doing it less than 20 weeks, right? So like every
Right.
person coming and going feels quite exciting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the only reason I know that number is because it shows it to me every time I send an email. It's like it's going to the so like I can't avoid
Right.
that one because you know that whole
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
about don't make decisions about your life after 9 p.m. Like don't look at the stats, especially
Yeah.
after 9 p.m.
Absolutely, because it's it's I'm guilty of that as well.
Hmm.
Having that kind of catastrophic mindset of like, but when I look at my stats, like, right, I've just lost a dozen subscribers to my newsletter, or
Hmm.
something like that, or my Instagram following's suddenly dropped overnight, and you just, when it first happens, you're like, oh, well, what did I do? What did
Yeah.
I do wrong?
Yeah.
Um, but you have absolutely no idea what's, somebody might have just given up photography, or they signed up
Yeah.
accidentally or something like that. You really don't know, so it's best just to not think
Yeah.
about it, I guess.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. It's funny. Like I've had this conversation with Alice a few times, especially with moving. You know, and you see
Yeah.
someone, and maybe you don't know them very well yet, or maybe they're not as pleased to see you as you expected, and you're just passing them in the street or whatever. And Alice is like, "Oh, they don't like us." Like they can't not like you. They don't know you, right? Like that's like
Exactly. Yeah.
you have no idea what's going on for that person. That
Yeah.
person is going and doing other things. Who knows? You know,
Yeah.
like someone hasn't used their Instagram account in 2 years and gets shut down. Like you don't know what happened to an individual. You can't bother yourself with
Exactly.
it.
And actually, this is the value of workshops,
Mm,
because even though hopefully I can devote more time to my own projects rather than workshops in the future, it would be a mistake to stop them entirely.
mm,
And I think it's because of the value that, yes, it encourages me to think about how to teach
mm,
photography, and it often inspires me as well, being amongst other photographers and teaching them and then seeing what they produce. But actually, on a more personal level, it has really helped to change me and my general personality and sort of view of people and the
mm,
world. Because all of a sudden, the young man, well, I'll say young man, I'm probably getting on a bit now, but the man in that small town in the northeast of England, it's very easy to kind of get that small town mentality when you've been
mm,
surrounded by the same people and in the same area for decades. Whereas all of a sudden, it's like, well, this is someone from the other side of the world with a different culture and a different mindset. And I was suddenly exposed to all that.
mm,
And that was great because it challenged my own thinking. But the right thing for me to do was not to dig my heels in, but like explain that to me. It's like, oh, actually, you're right. I'm wrong.
mm.
And that's what's been particularly valuable. And it also means exactly what you were saying about your reaction to how other people behave in the street or someone that you bump into in the woods. You have no idea what's going on in their life. Whereas in the past, I probably would have been like, oh, what's wrong with them? Or what did I do wrong? Or something like that. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, let it flow through you. I think this is why sometimes older people in our lives are so relaxed because they've just got
Yeah.
to a point of like they've understood that maybe sooner than we do. Because when you're,
Yeah.
especially when you're younger and you're like, no, I've got to prove myself, and it's like, well, especially in creative work, do you like the work you're making? Then that's great. You know,
Yeah.
like people, Vivian Mayer, nobody knew her work when she was alive. She just did
Yeah.
that for her for
Yeah.
decades. Just
Yeah.
boxes and boxes full of photographs that it turns out were incredible in a lot of
Yeah.
cases as well. Like just
Yeah.
incredible work, but just didn't actually want anyone to see it. Would possibly be appalled by the exhibitions and
Yeah.
the documentaries and things like that. Like
Yeah.
might be,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
isn't here to stop it. It's too late. And sometimes I think that's a crime as well. Like it turns out it's completely off topic, but do you know Prince recorded a bunch of music and just put it in a vault and just had
Really?
it there for just fully produced music videos, the whole works, and then just
Right.
put it to one side. And it was
But
just
I
like,
mean,
yeah,
I know what you're saying, isn't it a shame that that's not shared with the world? But I also think, isn't that just wonderful that
mm,
an artist would produce just for them and
yeah,
had no cravings for attention, just did it for pure love and joy of it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I love that. I love the idea of
just on your
that.
own terms. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I just become a
But it
little
sort of
hermit.
goes, but it goes back to where we started though, doesn't it? Of that kind of sometimes photography and creating art is quite a solitary pursuit in a lot of ways.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
That kind of I'm going to satisfy myself first, but sometimes the drive can be a little bit. But I'm also going to show you. I'm going to prove to you that this works. I'm going to, I've
Yeah,
got this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
idea, this quite bizarre concept, or something that maybe people would go, that shouldn't work, but it does, or whatever, or someone, maybe people don't have total faith in your capability here, like
Yeah.
you've never done it before and you're learning something new. But that's such a satisfying, it's such an interesting human that
Mm.
drive, isn't it, to kind of make something, even if it is driven a little bit like by I'll show you. And I find
Yes.
it a lot in photography with a lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah. It just, I mean, from my point of view, it was also lacking confidence.
Right.
So it was wanting to confident enough to put my work out there, but I kind of needed that reassurance. I wanted to see if people enjoyed it. I wanted people to give me an indication as to whether I was heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
But then it kind of snowballed from there, I guess. But I'm just wondering if a lot of people do that. They didn't put the work out there because they craved attention. It was all very kind of legitimate and personal reasons. But then maybe they get to a point where it just goes full circle, and they go back to just doing it for themselves, and then they become sort of more withdrawn from being online or however they share.
I feel like there's a good chance that by the time we get to the end of our lives, like this perpetually, terminally online thing might have been a bit of a blip.
Yes,
In a way that new
hopefully.
technologies come along. Well, yeah, new technologies come along. They can seem all-consuming. I remember years ago learning about how when Hancock's Half Hour was really, really popular on the radio, the BBC got letters from people. So this is in like the 40s and 50s.
Right.
They got letters from like pub owners who were asking them to stop because people would just leave, or they would stay at home, and the effect on their livelihood because people were at home huddled around the wireless and weren't going
Yes.
to the pub or weren't
Right.
going, like, so
Okay.
like I'm not sure human beings are very good at being exposed to radical new technologies sometimes as well. Like we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
we go a bit too hard at them, and then gradually
Yeah.
over time they become a tool. Wars used to be fought over books. Doesn't happen anymore,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Yeah. 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 It was, I was reading an article on the BBC news website, which was quite concerning. And they took a group of teenagers to do an experiment where they take their smartphones off them for a few days.
Mm.
But these people were spending at least 8 hours a day on their mobiles, and they were getting very little sleep because they're up until late. I mean, these are teenagers. And actually, some of them just caved within 24 hours and said, "No, I can't do it. The anxiety is too strong without my mobile phone. I want it back."
Yeah.
But parents had also observed, for the people that stuck with it, they'd observed better sleeping patterns, but also more engagement with the people that are around them. They were talking to the parents in a normal fashion, and generally better moods as well.
Yeah.
And this is people at an age where they're being shaped by this, and it can't be healthy to spend so much time with this technology. So yeah, I mean, personally I've distanced myself from social media over the last few months, and it's been a nice break. But now it's kind of, I'm chomping at the bit again to get back out there and share a bit more, and obviously it's also about respect for the people that have chosen to follow your work. I feel as if there is that kind of obligation to give them something, because they're being kind enough to follow along and show their support in different ways. So you can't just disappear. A break is good, and your good followers will appreciate that, but then you've got to get back out there as well.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Well, as we come into the end on the subject of letting your followers know your second lens choice and your final lens choice, and I love it when people play with the format. I think it's really good. I've had people who've rejected it completely, which was really good.
Okay.
And I also had Dan Baker was on. He was the episode that just came out. Chose three 335s, two of which were the same lens, just different versions of it.
Okay,
Brilliant.
right.
Yeah, it was like a Sumalux Leica lens and two Summicrons, and I was that's chef's kiss. So your second lens is
the Sony 24-70 G Master.
Nice.
So I guess I'm going to combine the two, because there's two versions of it now. So, I mean, it would have been much more romantic to talk about a Pentax lens that I had when I was 10, something like that. But I have no idea what it was.
Right. It was just
I'm
there.
not very good with kind of model names and things like that.
Mm.
So I can't remember what that lens was sat on top of an old Pentax film camera. But in terms of the current phase of my photography, if you like, I bought the 24-70 6-7 months, something like that, after I bought the 55mm, and it has been pretty much glued to my camera since. I have bought other lenses. I've got a 21mm Zeiss, which was a very indulgent purchase, primarily for one particular tree.
Right, nice.
And I did get the use out of it, but that needs to be sold. I've got a 7200 that needs to be sold because I don't really use that. I've got a 100-400 that needs to be sold. So I've got like an array of other lenses, which there's no point talking about them because I feel absolutely nothing for them whatsoever. I don't really feel much for any of my gear, really, but there's no denying that the 24-70, if you were to look at the exhibition that I had 2 years ago, like 99% of my photographs would have been with a 24-70, and some with a 55mm. So yeah, it's versatile. It sits within that kind of focal range of being able to make images which represent something that people find it very easy just to, like I said before, they can imagine themselves being there and seeing that. Because it just sort of, because I'm usually at the sort of 35mm end and upwards.
Yeah.
So it's just versatile, and it's pretty. I guess it's pretty weighty, but it's not too bad. But pretty much all the time, it's the only lens in the bag. That's it. And I got the version 2 now. Yeah, and I've got the version 2 now, which is worth it just on the weight saving alone. It's a bit sharper, I think, but just to have something a little bit lighter is really, really good. So yeah, those are the two.
Yeah, I love a simple kit bag. I think it sort of makes decisions for you in a lot of ways rather than having too many options. You know.
Yeah. So yesterday when I went out, I had the camera with the 24-70 in a holster bag. That was it.
Yeah.
That's nice. Typically how I shoot locally. That is it. Usually, I want to even avoid carrying water if I can. So I take water. I drink the best part of a litre before I set off, and that keeps me going for maybe 3-4 hours. Yeah. So then I don't have to carry that extra weight, and then by the time I get back to the car, I'm ready for some more. So I'm not getting dehydrated, but I don't have to carry it either. So usually the second most important thing in my kit bag is some nice homemade flapjack.
Okay. About the flapjack.
Yeah. So yeah, that's probably the thing that I'm more excited about is the flapjack.
No, completely. But again, then if you eat that at some point, then you don't have to carry it. No,
exactly. Yeah,
smart.
Exactly, yeah.
It's just good planning. It's the weight saving stuff and the size of bag is exactly the reason why I like the M system, and it's the same why the Fuji system's so great as well. Is like that size to kind of. I don't want to say performance because that makes it sound like it's just megapixels, and it isn't. It's about clarity and quality. Like you give me a GR3, right? That's an insane camera for that. Like it weighs less than a lot of lenses and produces beauty. And it's the entire camera, and you can just slip it in a pocket, shove it inside. Well, GR3 is just tremendous. So, but I think it's things like that appeal to me because but they also come with constraints. Like there's things they can and can't do. They won't get 15 frames per second out of them. You won't get, like some of them don't have IBIS, some of them don't have image, whatever. But it's that, what are the things that matter to you? And then for me, it's always how small can I make that kit?
Yeah.
And usually I've got 2 lenses in my bag, but like you, I very rarely find I change them. This weekend was an exception to that. I was in Edinburgh this weekend and I was swapping between my 35 and my 50 very liberally, which was lovely. But generally the 35 stays on the front and that's kind of it. And it just makes your choices for you. And then you go, right, okay.
And it's the 24-70 is a 2.8, which I don't care about. The only time I use 2.8 is for focusing. So I give myself a nice shallow depth of field. I can really fine tune the focus. And then I'm working in aperture priority and then I set it to whatever I'm going to shoot at, which is typically somewhere from 5.6 to 11 f11.
Yeah.
And that's it really. I mean, I'm such a basic user of the camera. I really am. The only place where I won't make compromises as far as weight and kit is concerned is the tripod and the head that I use. So the Arca Swiss Cube geared head. It's a beast. It's weighty, but I just would not be without it. It's one of the only pieces of kit that I have where I feel something for it. Because it has made such a difference to my workflow, as well as a tripod. So if it makes a difference to my workflow, and I can make new images and view the scenes differently because of what I've got in my hands, then good. Anything else is I'm not really interested in.
Yeah, everything else is just for free. That was the thing I will always remember you said to me. I rocked up to your workshop with a 7-day shop. I think it was less than £10 the tripod I had. That I brought with me on that workshop. It was just shoddy. And I remember you were helping me set up a scene or set something up, and you were just fighting with my stupid tripod. You were like, and I was saying to you something like, "Oh, I think I need a different lens or a different thing," and you were like, "I think you need a better tripod."
Exactly.
Like you've got an A7 there and a decent lens. That is not the problem. The problem is not here. The problem is underneath it.
Yes,
trying to get
exactly.
lined up. If you spend 15 minutes fighting with the tripod to get it set up, and then you've missed the light because it's passing through, then
So like yesterday, the only way I was able to get something different with that scene that I was looking at again was because of the tripod.
Yeah,
because I had it set like well above head height. I mean, I was stretching to reach the camera, and I love that, being able to shoot that bit higher, and it enabled me to do something different, not necessarily better, but it opened up an opportunity which I didn't previously have. So that's when it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sort of making some time to have a little chat. It's been lovely to catch up and see
no problem.
what you're up to and
have we gone an hour already? Blimey!
You know, we have this. That is an advert in itself. The time flies by. You see, that's how it goes. Yeah. No, it's brilliant. Where can people find you and copies of the book if they're interested after this conversation?
Yes, please go to allthews.baxter.photos. So from there you can find links to social media stuff and YouTube. But yes, there's my book Gathering Time, which has I think 7 years worth of work in there, and 96 images, 10,000 words, forward by Joe Cornish. And it would be nice to. I still do have a few of those. It'd be nice to shift those before the next book comes along, which is still a way off, by the way.
Yeah. But brilliant stuff. Well, thanks, mate. Have a wonderful rest of the day. It's been really
Thank you very much.
And if you're ever up this way again, or next time you're doing a workshop, let me know. And
yes, we'll do. Yeah, no, yeah. Thanks for the invite, and it was good to see you again after all this time.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, mate. Take it easy. Give Meg a big hug from us.
Will do. Thanks very much. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
You can rate and review this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and that'll help people to find the show. You can also sign up for a midweek newsletter that I've started doing. You can get that at ianfarrell.com/sign-up, and there is a link to it in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.